and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 128. Today we're going to be talking about a fashion shoot, or specifically there was a fashion festival. It was my fourth collaboration with Circle Vintage. Actually, I'll give you a few more bits of information on that in a minute. But in essence, is that so there was Catwalk, there was taking photos, but the big problem that I was up against was the fact that it was very low light. And so therefore I was pushing the camera to the limit. So I tried out a couple of different options, working my way through until I eventually settled on ways that worked. So that's really what I'm going to talk to you about in today's podcast. Also, stick around because there's the critique section where we have a couple of people, Nadia and Robert have both sent in images for bits of feedback. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later. So here we are, live on YouTube, unless you happen to be watching the recording. And so if you are watching live, then leave me a comment. Let me know where in the world you are, what the weather's doing. As we go, ask questions, leave comments, chat with each other as well. The chat box is there. Do make use of it. So I can see we've got a couple of people in already. Meg says hello everyone. Pat says from a greyish Somerset, hope everyone is well. Maggie says hello everyone. April says hello from a warm, mostly sunny Long Island, New York. Jack says Jack in Florida, hello. John Harvey from Columbus, Ohio says good day. Rosemary is joining us again, says good morning everyone, it's great to be back with you all here today. It's raining cats and dogs here in Washington State according to our weather station. Now Rosemary wasn't here last week but was off visiting her daughter I believe Rosemary's just become a grandmother. I'm guessing that's what you went shooting off for. Hope everything is well on that front, Rosemary. VG says, good evening, everyone. The Bevs, Karen, is that? It's such a problem trying to keep a track of everybody's handle when it's not actually their name on it. I think it's Karen. Says, afternoon, everyone, from a grey Shipley. Hope everyone's better than the weather. April saying hi to a few people, and Rosemary says yes, I'm a nana now, beautiful baby girl. Everyone doing well, congratulations Rosemary, and congratulations to your daughter. It's always fun the first time you become a grandparent. Right, okay, so we have people in. Did I say VG? VG says good evening everyone as well. I'm not sure if I missed you there. I'll find out on the replay. I can't hit replay to see whether I already said it because this is going out live as I'm doing it. Right, so what are we going to be talking about? Well, what I'm going to be talking about is Rock for ReDress. Slow fashion movement, slow fashion festival, in fact. Now, some of you who've been around for at least a year or so may remember that last year I did a collaboration with Circle Vintage in Dumfries. Now, Circle Vintage is a vintage clothes store. Anything from the 1960s through to the 1990s. I remember being quite shocked at the idea that the 1990s was vintage, but pretty much I think I was told that if it's over 25 years old, it counts as vintage, and if it's over 100 years old, then it's antique. And that's when you suddenly kind of realise that probably half the stuff in my wardrobe is naturally vintage. Certainly my style is, I've not really changed. I think I wear pretty much the same style of clothes that I did back in the 90s as well, which is maybe slightly disturbing. Anyway, Circle Vintage do proper recycling clothes and or proper vintage clothing, but that's also part of a whole movement, a whole notion of the idea of slow fashion. Now, slow fashion comes about in contrast to fast fashion. Most of us have heard of fast fashion, which is today a lot of what's happening today, and it's been happening actually over the last few decades as well. It's clothing which is made really tends to be worn once. It's bought if worn at all. There's an awful lot of people who go out and they buy clothes, maybe doesn't even get worn, or it gets worn once and then it gets thrown away. Now, quite apart from the fact that an awful lot of textiles aren't always created in the most environmentally friendly kind of conditions in the first place, some of them, of course, are also done in some seriously ethically dodgy ways as well, with all sorts of sweatshops going on in developing countries And so your fashion, so the cheap, especially the cheaper end of the fashion market, tends to be really quite horrific if you start looking at it in any depth. So, and then you've got, of course, you've then got the problem of landfill. What do you do with all these dresses and clothes and stuff that are being worn once and then just thrown away? And there are billions, literally billions of tons of clothing produced every single year that just end up in landfill. An awful lot of them never even worn even the once. So it's and it's not necessarily that people are buying this with a deliberate aim to help towards the destruction of the planet. It's a lot of it, awful lot of it's about ignorance and not understanding. So things like the slow fashion movement are part of a drive to try and educate the fact that you don't have to throw clothing away. You can recycle, you can upcycle, you can reuse. And so last year, on the back of these ideas, Dan and Marie from Circle Vintage decided to set up ReDress, the slow fashion, Dumfries slow fashion movement, and they had the slow fashion show at the Theatre Royal in Dumfries. And for those of you who want to go back and check, I can't remember, somewhere around episode 87, 88, 89, something like that, I did a talk. I talked about the shoot that I did. So a year on, they moved it from a fashion show to a kind of a fashion festival, Rock for ReDress. So it was a whole evening, and there was two different catwalk bits where people came up, and there were different designers in the area. The whole bit got a bit bigger. There were live bands, performance theatre, and it spread across the evening. And I was, so because of my involvement last year, because I got a good relationship with Circle Vintage, I said, I came on board to do some photography as well. Now, we then, part of the problem was that I initially immediately came up against was the fact that we changed venue. It was a huge, large space, Lawburn Hall, great space, except for the fact that the lighting was very low. And for any of you who've ever tried shooting in low light, then you know that very few cameras cope particularly well with it. So what are you going to do? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take you through some of the photos that I took, and talk about some of the problems that I was up against and ultimately my way of resolving it. And I think you might find it kind of interesting. I mean, although not everybody here is going to be end up photographing on a fashion show, you might, anybody who's doing photography will sooner or later come across the low light problems, and so I'm hoping you'll find it interesting. Couple more comments here. A photo bizarre. That's Robert and Ann says, howdy from Texas. Anne and Rob watching on a brisk sunny morning. And Rosemary says, I love this trend towards remaking clothing. I have my great aunt's sewing manual on remarkable clothes during World War II, when new was unavailable. All that's old is new again. Wisdom cycling around. Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. I think this notion, we're only doing what our parents and grandparents did anyway. But it seems to have got lost in a lot of the modern world. So what I'm going to do then, let me find you some photos here. And first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip across and show you this. Now, let me just, I need to make a couple of little adjustments here as I remove that so that I can actually see what's going on. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about essentially what's going on here. Now, you can barely see anything on this screen. You can see a couple of little rows of lights. So this was before anything started. It's kicking off. The main lights have gone down, and at this point, where am I? I need to put that frame back on. Sorry, if I want to, there we go. So if I want to tell you what the settings are. So on my settings on my camera, I've got an f7.1, exposure time 100th of a second, ISO 2000. And as you can see, well, you can't see. You just, that as a kind of, it's just nothing's working there. So anyway, then lights come on, and I realise I've got to go up a bit. Well, not all lights come on. The only real light that's come on is this great big spotlight. But in order to get anything here, I've had to go up to ISO 12,000, ISO 12,800 in fact, which, as you know, is incredibly grainy. So, you know, we move it, the quality here is very poor. As soon as you start zooming in, you can see this sort of mass of noise and what have you. And this is on the, and you know, you're not going to be particularly making out faces or much in the way of detail. You can just about get away with it as a web photo, but you're never going to be able to get away with it in print. So I then sort of, so I'm down one end. We've got this walkway going up. There's a bar over here. There's all sorts of other bits going on up at the back here. If we turn around 45 degrees to the right, here we've then got our host for the evening. We've got Chelsea here and Madam Joe. And these are our hosts. And this one was then taken, I've got this on, again, ISO 1600, trying to make the most of available light. But you can see it's really poor. I'm not really getting anything out. So at this point, I get out a trusty flash, stick it on top of the camera, and fire it off. And I've not quite got the settings right. And so then I kind of up everything a bit, and boom, great. I've now lit everybody up, but where's the atmosphere gone? You know, it now looks like this is being done in a school hall or something like that. There's all the kind of moody lightingness, which your eyes brilliantly adjust to and the camera doesn't, has gone completely and is absolutely washed out. So we've got Chelsea and Madam Joe here chatting away, you know, introducing what the evening's going to be about and what's going to go on. So I play around a little bit more, I play around with settings, realise I'm not particularly getting anywhere, and so decide to sort of disappear and head up the other end and see what else I can find. So at this point, I then come across Catherine, who's up on stilts, wearing this huge, wonderful dress. She looks great, except for the fact that, again, ambient light here, or you know, the existing light, is high ISO. I shove a flash on. It's, well, actually, I don't think, did I put the flash on with this? I'm not sure that I did. Yes, I did. There's a little bit of shadow behind John here, over here. So obviously, but again, she's a bit further away. I'm not getting very far. I boost the power of the flash, and so she's lit up. But again, forward facing light is never the best. It rarely is. So actually what I did was, this is John, this is Catherine's dad, and I handed him, I took the flash off my camera, handed it to him, put it to shoot from the side, and said, can you just give me a bit of side light like that? And then I did this shot. And whilst in the, you know, in the basic JPEG, some of the highlights are all kind of a bit blown out. Once I've managed to edit it, I kind of managed to take it to this level, and there we have a reasonably acceptable photo. And at this point, you see, I'm able to get the ISO down to about 2000, which still is quite high, but it's an awful lot better than 12.5. Now, I have to say at this point, I'm using my new mirrorless R5 camera, so it's full frame mirrorless camera, so it is in its own right, it's coping an awful lot better than my previous 7D Mark II. But even then, even that, it's still kind of pushing everything to the limit the entire time. So now the show's about to get underway. I'm up the top end, and I turn and I look down, and Chelsea is right down the bottom here. I've got the flash on the camera, and it's, no, sorry, not got the flash here. I've just got this kind of gain ambient light. So I put the flash on the camera, and all that happens here is the audience in the foreground all gets lit up. Chelsea down the bottom there, can't really see her. So this is the problem, is that the light drops away the further you get on with it. So it's kind of starting to feel like, well, what am I going to do here? So I go down to the bottom end and try and think, well, okay, maybe I could shoot from the bottom, shooting up the way. And here we get Madam Joe, hit her. I've got the flashback on top of the camera. Here's it with that, and again, it's not a great photo. The light to me is ugly. We're showing up all the people in the audience. We're showing up the roof. We're not getting any of the kind of atmosphere of it. We just lost all the atmosphere. So then at this point, then I decide, right, okay, well, I'm going to take the flash off. And at this point, Madame Jo's, I can't remember the opening song, but she's singing her heart out. It's great fun. Everybody's kind of really getting into it. And I get a nice sense of movement here with this one. Slightly out of focus because, of course, I'm not wanting to go below about 100th of a second here, because then we're into my own kind of personal handshake wobble bit. But of course she's moving, so because she's moving and it's not being frozen in place by the flash, we've got the problem of a little bit of a slightly out of focus, but that's okay. We can get away. I really quite like the movement in this one. So you can see then that we're kind of off to this immediate problem with with the lighting and quite how I'm going to do this. So a couple of comments in here. Pat says, "Thank heaven I never had to do the catwalk. It would have been a disaster." Oh, I'm sure you would have done it wonderfully, Pat. VG says, "Sustainability is very important. Great cause, absolutely." And Pat says, "Beautiful shot of the blue dress." Oh, that's when Catherine was on the stilts. So, okay, so Madame Jo has now kind of done an introductory song. We start getting the people out onto the stage, and there's two sets going on. Now we've got this long catwalk, and the way it's being lit is there's a big spotlight on a stand at one end and a big spotlight on the stand at the other end, and they're both kind of coming down to the middle. So I went back up to the top end of this, and you end up with this, and I took this shot. So yeah, I always talk about nice bit of backlight, but the problem here is, what am I at? I'm at ISO 10,000 at this point. I've got f4.5, and it's difficult. It's, because actually 10,000, the quality here, it's all pixelated. We're not making out any real detail. The other problem here is that the two models at this point here are they've left the light of there. We can still see the shadows, but they've not yet walked into the big light at the other end. Then they kind of come in a bit further and they get closer. And when they get to here, I suddenly realise we've got a major problem with the fact that the light isn't on them. Somebody has managed to knock the light that's sort of up at this end, and you can see it's lighting up the audience here wonderfully. These people beautifully lit. Our models, not so. Now again, if you're in the audience, your eyes have adjusted to what's going on. So it's becoming a real pest. It's becoming a real pain. What am I going to do? So then I decide I'm going to run down to the back down to the other end, and I'm going to try and get the models as they come back down. Now at this point, what I'll say is that we had there were 4 photographers in the space. There was me, and the 3 others had kind of different cameras, and we're kind of slightly responsible for different aspects of the shoot. But everybody was suffering from the problem of the low light. Now, to try and kind of create a little bit, a boost to the flash as such, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you here. So you can take a flash like this and you can point the light, but the light's very kind of instantly directional and fairly can be kind of a bit narrow beam. So what you want to do is you want to spread the light a bit. And I can't remember but so what you can get is what's sometimes called a kind of an omni. Is it omni? It's an all directional, basically a piece of plastic you put on top. Now, here I have a home constructed one. So this, what happens here then is the flash fires into this bit of plastic that's not completely transparent, slightly opaque. The light hits the box, and then it spreads all around. So it's a kind of diffuser, but it gives you a big wide splash of light every time the flash goes off. Now, you can buy official ones for flashes. So I've got a couple of Canon flashes. I think I might have been using Canon flash on the night. If you want to buy a piece of plastic, which is basically a slightly more moulded shape than this, it will cost you £20 or about $25, €25, that kind of figure for a piece of plastic. Now, the homemade version is what you do is you get a business card box, right? So, you know, one of these little boxes or business cards. Sometimes you order a bunch, you get a bunch, and then what you can do is in the base of it you score a cross, right? And the cross then allows you, it creates this kind of thing, and then with that shape, it actually then bends, and you can push your flash through it, right? And then at that point, you can take the top part and stick it back on. And if you don't want the top part pinging off, here's one I made earlier. I've just put a little bit of see-through sellotape, scotch tape around that. But you can see it's got the same little cut piece in the bottom, and that came free with a bunch of business cards I'd ordered a few years ago. So that, you know, for the time that it takes to put score a cross into the bottom of the box and put a bit of tape around, as opposed to paying £20. Does it matter? Does it look less than professional? Nobody's looking. Nobody cares. And in fact, one of the other photographers, who I absolutely apologise right at this moment, her name has gone completely out of my head. I lent her one of these to use. She was there as an assistant to try and get the models coming up the catwalk, and basically she sat up at this far end. So where we are here, what they did was they put a couple of sofas up the top down at this far end on the left corner, specifically for the photographers, so that when the models came up, they could pause at the end of the catwalk and the photographers could take the photos. Was it Lauren? Could have been Lauren. Apologies if it's not Lauren. So she had one of these on the end to take photos. I was kind of running around trying to get photos from different angles, different ideas, and but like I say, so you've got this problem then that the main light is shining on here, but the flash just isn't. So I went back down to the bottom end again, down to the far end here to point up, and I thought, well, I'll try and get the models as they're coming back down the catwalk. So here you can see they've reached the top front and the light is missing them. So at this point, we've now got these models kind of coming in. They've walked up, they're coming back down. I've got the flash on the camera to using one of these things to try and catch them. But again, we still have this problem of it's picking up the audience as much as anything else. So there comes a point where I think, well, okay, what am I going to do? Still, you know, and then because they're moving, getting closer to me, suddenly the flash is brightening out. I'm having to make constant adjustments to the camera because I don't trust the auto. I will say at this point, the auto settings on the camera don't want to do it for me. They're constantly latching on to the wrong things. So I am operating on manual, and with every single photo I take, I'm having to make micro adjustments for the next photo. And so it's requiring a lot of fast thinking, and a lot of the times, by the time I go, oh, right, that's the wrong setting, make an adjustment, now it's the right setting, except the people have moved, and now I've got to make another setting. So there was a real kind of franticness to a lot of these photos. And with this one, we've got, am I still using the flash? Yes, still using the flash with this one. I'm starting to get the hang of sort of how far away. If this one's been edited, so I've darkened down the audience a little bit to allow in post-production, to allow more focus to come back onto the models. This one here, likewise, she was great, walking along, loved the way the hair was going down, tried to time it so I got the pigtails as they were kind of, you know, up rather than down as she's sort of bouncing along the catwalk. And yeah, so hold on a sec, I've gone too far with that. So that's, so for the rest of that part there, that's kind of what I did, was I sort of set myself up for, I just sort of sat in the corner, got them as they walked back down the way with the flash at a particular setting. I wasn't massively happy with it, but it meant that I got a few of the shots. So we then came into, sorry, I just pause a sec. Just see if we've got any comments. Oh, John says, I've had similar lighting issues myself. Meg says, was it a lot of fun to do the photo shoot? Fun. It's a really good question, because I do have this sometimes. People say, are you enjoying yourself? In fact, actually, there was a point whereby I was having a little chat with somebody during a quiet spot, and they said, oh, are you enjoying yourself? And I really had to pause and think about it, because my brain wasn't in the mode of enjoyment. I'm not thinking fun as I'm doing it. As I'm doing it, all I'm thinking is problem solving. All I'm thinking is, what have I got to do next? Every photo I take, or set of photos, I'm then taking a quick look in the back of the camera, seeing what the settings are like, making these little micro adjustments, taking another shot. And so the brain is in full problem solving mode. And when you're just, every shot you're doing is about solving a problem, you're not thinking fun. In a way, the fun comes afterwards. The fun comes from when you go, wow, actually I managed to pull that off. Some of these photos actually worked. Some of these photos were okay. And afterwards it feels like it was fun. But it has to be said that actually at the time itself, fun just doesn't sit in my head. It's not a part of it. And when somebody said to me, are you having a good time? I actually had to sort of pause and really think about it and go, yes, I think so. But again, kind of ask me at the end of the evening. So yeah. Rosemary says, your DIY diffuser is much nicer looking than the ones I've made out of milk jugs. Yeah, milk cartons, and other brilliant things. Yes, that opaque, sort of slightly opaque white plastic is perfect for this. But yeah, there's all sorts of, I mean, just YouTube DIY diffusers for flash or speedlight accessories, homemade, and there's all sorts of things. You know, you can everything from Starbucks cups through to milk cartons, or milk jugs, stuff, that kind of thing as well. I'm a huge fan of this kind of idea of say DIY photography accessories. It's not just the case of saving the money, although that's always a thing. There's also a sense of upcycling, recycling. But I just love the creativity. Again, it's problem solving. How are you going to solve this problem? And if you can solve this problem by cutting up a plastic jug, then perfect. I think that's a better solution than going out and buying something ready-made. Robert says, I love to DIY my own equipment as well. I will need to do that with the Flashbox. And Pat says, smashing little girl. Yeah, she was a lot of fun. Right, so the next bit then, we're into a kind of, there's a break, there's other things going on, then we come back, and the next fun bit comes up is Kate, and Kate with ethereal arts. And what she's doing here is she's got lights, and she's got glowing balls of lights which she's swinging around, and they're making these fantastic patterns. And the flash is still sitting on my camera from the first half. I go click, and this is what we capture. And I suddenly realised, oh, you can't see the light. We've got a ball here and a ball here, and a slight little blur because it's moving quite fast. And even though I'm on, what is this, 100th of a second or something like that, and 125th of a second, because the flash has frozen it, there's virtually no movement, no colour, no light, and it's a really dull photo. It's doing absolutely nothing. It's not capturing anything. So I suddenly thought, okay, what I need to do long exposure for this. So I immediately dialed my camera down to 2 seconds, turned off the flash, I knew there was nowhere I was going to hold the thing, but fortunately, sitting up at the far end where the sofas were, there was also a little table. So I rested the camera on the table, 2-second exposure, and hit go, click. And of course, I'd utterly forgotten to change the settings on the camera. So while I was sort of sitting at 1000 or 2000 ISO for 2 seconds, that was just way too, the whole thing blew out. So now I knew I was going to have to sort of start adjusting again. So I make an adjustment to 100 ISO 160. It's still kind of a bit too much. So I changed to ISO 100 f6.3 for 2 seconds, and I get this. And this is much more like it, because now we have, she's swinging about, and we've got this sort of fantastic light show going on. And then what I did was I took 4 or 5 photos. She's 3 or 4, I can't remember that kind of number, 4 photos, give or take 1 or 2, as she came up the aisle. And then in post-production, because the camera was just sort of sitting there on the desk, so it hadn't moved, I was able to overlay them. And then I just sort of mixed several of them together. And then that way we're able to get, you can see this sort of movement of boots from the slow, but we've also got now several of these swinging bits that all kind of come together. So that was a kind of fun one to do. I then pulled out a little bit further. Here you can see here's one shot, and then overlaying several of them again together, so that we get all these spins coming in different directions, and it feels like a much more kind of full fun photo. And that gives you more of the atmosphere of what it was like when Kate was swinging these multicolored balls, lights around, because it was a fantastic show. But it's how you try and capture something which is all about movement when you're static, and the light is poor, and the flash is obviously just going to drown everything out. So we need to have the longer exposure there. So 2 seconds, but then, like I say, what I then did was I overlaid up in editing 4 or 5 of these images together. So we then move on to the second stage of the show, and again I put the flash on. I think, right, I'm going to get a shot. Here's Madame Joe doing another song, and again it's just the light is terrible, and I just, at this point, I'm thinking this is no good. I'm just not going to be able to work with the flash at this point. So what I decided to do was what I'm going to settle on now is working with the existing light. Now, fortunately, at this point, the big light that was pointing down from the far end had been adjusted to point back onto the catwalk rather than being knocked over to the side to the audience. And here we have Chelsea again, only Chelsea she's now got on the showstopper, the final image from last year. So again, some of you might remember the photo that I did, photo shoot that I did for last year's ReDress show. This was the kind of finale image, love slow fashion, with this amazingly colourful dress. And now Chelsea, again, for those who remember, a couple of months back, or a month or so ago, she was the woman who was in the bath with the wedding dress on. Anyway, so Chelsea's here, and she kind of starts strutting up the stage and just looking fantastic. The light isn't absolutely lined up. We can see that we've lost part of her into the shadow, but it's a lot better than it was. Now, at this point, I will say, 2 of the photographers have now abandoned using their cameras. Lauren, she's using one of these. I'm using natural light, but this guy down here has decided he's given up with his camera, and he's just decided to use his phone, as did one of the other photographers. And part of that is because, quite simply, it does have to be said that modern phones, the cameras are incredibly. So if you've got a something like the latest iPhone or the Samsung, or the Google Pixel, from the last year or two, the sophistication of these, and it's not just that, it's the AI, it's the algorithms, it's the intelligent, the way that they're set up is they're constantly reading, and then they're boosting the low light in the shadows, and they're toning down the highlights automatically. Now the thing is most of it is working on auto, so it does mean that it's very, very difficult to override quickly on your phone. So you are limited to what the auto settings can do. But for most people who are certainly for most people, the auto settings are going to do a better job under most circumstances. And if your camera, if you're struggling with your camera in the low light, if you've got a smaller camera, or you don't have full frame, or you don't have the latest one, then these problems of low light become so problematic that actually under a lot of circumstances your phone might well do better for you than your camera. And at this point, like I say, two of the other photographers had actually given up. There was only me and Lauren still using our cameras at that point, and Lauren's using the flash diffuser as well to get her shots. But at this point, what am I up to here? I'm on ISO 4000 at this point. Now, like I say, if I'd been on my Canon 7D Mark II, it would never have coped with this. It would have been a higher ISO to begin with, and the quality wouldn't have been so good. So I was really pleased with the way that the camera was operating once I finally got there. Having realised that I had to make sure that there was no point in taking a photo while the model was further down the strip. So at this point here, they're coming up. That's the first point. I've got to make sure that they are being lit by this big light before I've got any chance of getting a usable photo. And then at this point, I'm starting to settle in, and we've got all these amazing outfits and creations from several different designers. And Eva here, who you wouldn't recognise her, but for those who remember the car shoot that I did, that kind of road trip thing where I had two women in that. Eva was one of those. And so here it's going quite nicely. She's turned her back because she's got a light dress. It's catching the light. Things are going quite well. This one, I love this with the kind of birdcage headdress. And in the end, these photos kind of worked. Our final, the big finale piece, Angela last year had been wearing the Great Big Love Slow dress. She's now wearing this one, and she's wearing this cape, and it's being carried by Joseph and Tim at the end, almost like page boys, kind of carrying, and it's this cape, so she gets to the end and she turns around and it unfurls, and it's 10 meters long, and it's been painted by the artist Emma Visca. And so this was our kind of finale piece. And then you can kind of see it, and then as a final thing, she just sort of loosed it off her shoulders, and walked out, leaving it on the stage. So that was the shot. That was the shoot we did, and then yes. So we then needed to get some of these off to Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine, and so essentially, what was great was where are we? Just turn over here. Hold on one sec. Have I gone past, or have I picked up the wrong one? No, I haven't. Surely not. No, there we go. Yes, that's it. So, have this great one of Chelsea dancing up the aisle there. And as you can see, that even though that one was, did I say 4000 ISO? Yeah, 4000 ISO. I've managed to clean it up enough, and it's managed to print up rather nicely there. So certainly good enough for the magazine. And then they took a whole pile of them and then did a full double-page spread of all the rest of the photos. And even this one of Madame Joe dancing up the aisle, that was slightly out of focus, still managed to print up rather well. So in the end, not a bad haul at all. And of course, all the photos were perfectly good enough for, even the ones that were at massively high, kind of 12,000 ISO, were fine for the web. So for social media, we could kind of get away with it. My concern all along had been what's going to work in print. And a lot of these photos are the really high ISO ones I knew were never going to really print up much bigger than a kind of quarter page in size before you might start noticing it. But I cleaned them up, and some of those, well, one being worked as a half page and quite a lot of slightly smaller ones, and you managed to get away with it. So ultimately it worked. But it was difficult, and but it's that thing of what you've got to do in those circumstances is work out what your camera is capable of, how you can position yourself, and you just, yeah, it's do you use the flash? Do you not use the flash? There's compromise either ways. You're compromising on quality by not using the flash, but you're compromising on the atmosphere if you do use the flash. And for me, in the end, I felt the atmosphere was kind of better to try and grab that rather than blowing it out with the flash. But I was, like I said, I was fortunate in the fact that my new mirrorless camera, which is full frame, was able to cope with the higher ISOs in a way that my crop sensor 7D Mark II would never have been able to do. I think if I had my 7D Mark II, I may well have ended up using the phone as well. Right, a couple more comments here. Rosemary says, thank you for sharing all those attempts that didn't work as well as the ones that did. It's reassuring to know I'm not the only one who struggles. Well, no, you're not the only one who struggles. Even top professional, super people who are paid massive amounts of money and do the whole kind of Vogue, everybody struggles. Every photographer struggles. What you've got to remember is that for every one photo that appears in print, there will be hundreds, if not thousands, that were taken that never made the grade. With ourselves, part of that kind of imposter syndrome thing is we only ever see, when we look at somebody else's photo, the one that worked, and then was edited and polished up. With our own, we see the hundreds of folders full of images that never worked. But the other photographer you see also has hundreds of folders, you're just not seeing those. So because we become aware of all our own failures, lack of success, our steps, our learning processes on the way, and our number of good photos compared to the ones that we know that didn't work seems a very small ratio. But when we look at somebody else's, we only ever see that best stuff. It's very easy to get confused and assume that other people all know what they're doing and we're the only ones who don't. But the reality is everybody is making mistakes all the time. And the photographers who don't make any mistakes are not learning. They have reached the limit of what they're doing, and now they're sticking absolutely within their comfort zone. And what I've said before, and I will say again, and I will probably say many times again, is fine for the ones that we get right, we get the praise, and that's lovely. But we very rarely learn anything. We learn from all the ones that that went wrong. The ones that worked, I finally I heaved a sigh of relief. Once I got it working, I was then able to shoot off a few more photos and get ones that could be printed into the magazine. But at that point, I wasn't learning anything new. I'd learnt by all the ones that went wrong. So you have to embrace the idea that your photos are going wrong. And if they're not going wrong, you're not learning. And I think that's a really important thing to grasp, and not to be ashamed or worried about the number of photos that you take that don't work. Every single photo you take that doesn't work is a step forward where you are learning. It means you have pushed yourself outside your comfort zone, and it means you are growing in knowledge with your camera, and that's a brilliant thing. So never get hung up on that. What else have we got? Yeah, VG says, taking photos during night is a nightmare, really. Thanks for the tips. It says, wow, this one is amazing. Not sure which one you're talking about there, but Pat says, must have been nerve-wracking, but it all came good in the end. Well done. And VG says, certainly would have been scared stiff, would have used my mobile. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Cool. So, oh yeah, Rosemary says if they're not going wrong, you're not learning. I must be learning a lot. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So you should be. Okay, superb. So what we're going to talk. I will just say. So next week, well, I'll talk about this again, but next week I'm going to be doing another section that I did from the fashion show as well. This wasn't the whole lot, but I'll talk more about that at the end, so hang around for that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the critique section. So I've had two people send in, Nadia and Robert have sent in images for critique. And just to remind you that the critique section is your opportunity to learn. Don't be frightened here of putting in images. Very often we're taking photos and they're not working, but we're not sure why they're not working, and we kind of get stuck. And we think, well, okay, I've taken a photo here. There's bits I like about it, bits that I don't, but I'm not sure. Is it the crop? Is it the story? Should I have stood somewhere else? Should I have put my camera on different settings? And this is your chance to get feedback. Or even, I've got a photo which I'm really quite pleased with here. I want to know how I could improve it. Send it to me. Send it to this podcast. It's very difficult to get good feedback on your photos. Most of the time we put our stuff up on Facebook, our friends all click like, whether it's any good or not. They click like because they're being good friends and they want us to feel good about ourselves, which is lovely. That's what friends are for. But your friends aren't photographers for the most part. Very few people have a good photographer friend who can actually give them real, genuine, honest feedback. And if somebody asks you for real, genuine, honest feedback on their photos, most of the time you'll be really cautious about it because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Now, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings either, but if you send me your photos, I will give you tactful, honest feedback on how to improve on the photos. So this is your opportunity. Send me your images and I'll do my best to help. So if you are sending your images, if you're part of Facebook, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, type that into Facebook, you can find the Facebook group, join it if you haven't already. You can put your images in there, or if you don't do Facebook, then kimayres.co.uk is my web address. So kim@kimayres.co.uk will get the image to me. When you send it to me, let me know what your sticking point is. Let me know what your difficulty is, or give me a little bit of background about the photo, what it is you like about it, what it is you're having struggles with, what it is you are hoping to achieve, and then I will do my best to be able to help you with that. Okay, so let's move on then to, we'll start with Nadia here. So a couple of weeks ago, Nadia sent in, she sent me the edited and the unedited version. So this here is the unedited version, and then this is the edited version. And she said, "Hi Kim, I've attached two pictures, one being the unprocessed, the other the processed one. I have mixed emotions about the processed one. I like it, but there's a niggling question swimming around in my head about the light on the caravans." So that's the light that's going on down here. Is the light distracting and making the eye move away from the main subject, which is the lighthouse? Your comment on last week's video, so Nadia sent this a couple of weeks back, but we haven't had a critique section. About red and yellow being dominant colours. This made me think, is the yellow dulled down enough not to distract the eye? Okay, well. So thanks for sending this one in, and I can see why it's grabbed your eye. We've got the lighthouse. The lighthouse is being lit up in these kind of pinks and purples, quite dramatic. The sun has gone down. We're into the blue hour. Sky's getting a bit dramatic, but then we've also got this kind of yellow warm glow of a caravan park underneath. And so the question is if the key part of the photo is the lighthouse, and that's where you're wanting your eye to go, is the yellow of the park grabbing the attention and taking your eye away from it? Is it diluting the impact? Now, a couple of things to talk about here, I think. First of all, I do have to say, Nadia, that I'm not a huge fan of having a border on a photo like this for when it's digital and online. The idea of having the surrounding mount, which is white or black or whatever it is fine if you've printed it up. Traditionally frames, most prints tend to, you have a print, you have a mount, you have the frame, and that looks great. The mount gives it a border. But when we're online, we have limited amount of real estate, really, a limited amount of space. Our screen is much smaller. We've already reduced down to maybe 1,000 pixels across, maybe smaller, depending on if you're looking at it on a phone. And when you create a border around it, you're making that image even smaller again. So you're losing the potential for people to see more detail, more of the photo. Unlike a printed one, where you can just kind of get closer to it, if it's on screen, we try and get closer to it, we just lose detail. There isn't the same amount of detail in there already. We've already lost a lot of detail by making it a web-friendly image. So when you stick a border around it, you're losing even more information. So I don't really see the point of putting a border around. Now, I know there are some people who do this, and some people would argue otherwise. And if you feel in the end that for you it's a really important thing to do, then you stick by that. That's your choice. But for me personally, I tend to feel, like I say, what you're doing is it's a loss of information on the web. Where you've already got a smaller image, you're losing even more. You're making it even smaller by putting a border around it. I don't tend to feel a border is necessary. The other thing by having a bright white border is it starts playing with the eye perception as well. So when an eye is looking at stuff, we automatically adjust. If you think about when you're indoors and you step outside, suddenly everything is too bright. If you're outdoors and then you look indoors and you go indoors, suddenly everything's too dark. Our brain is making adjustments all the time compared to what else is around. And sometimes, there's a bright wall, our eyes adjust to the bright wall, and then that affects what we might have been seeing in the shadows. We don't see what's in the shadows so well. So actually having a bright white border is automatically making the whole image that little bit darker. Our eyes strain a little bit more to see what's going on. So with that in mind, to really give you a slightly better sense of what's going on with your picture, I would just want to kind of crop that border off. And I think if you're displaying this picture online anywhere, then really, as I say, I don't think there's much call to have it there. So for the sake of this, and I hope you're not offended in any way by this, Nadia, I'm just going to crop that border off for the moment. Now, okay, so now I have a sort of slightly better sense of what the picture is and what it's doing. So just to double check here, you go back here, there's your unedited version as well. And with the unedited version, the orange is really kind of, we're not noticing this bit quite as much. The lighthouse is standing out, but it's kind of standing out to the exclusion of all else. So the question then is, if we go back to here, that you're talking about the fact that your lighthouse is the main topic, and is the caravan park distracting from it? Now, there's nothing wrong with having a secondary element to a photo. If your lighthouse is the key element, it's the first bit we notice with this, that's fine. But you can have other elements which then support it, and that's okay. So what it's about then is it's about trying to find the balance. Now what I would say here is, in a way, what you've got is you've got three elements. You've got the lighthouse, you've got the sky, and you've got the caravan park. Now, if it's just about the lighthouse against the sky, then actually you wouldn't have the caravan park. What you might do is just have a shot which is actually more like that. In which case, the narrative is about the lighthouse and how the lighthouse contrasts against the clouds and the sky in the background. And what might have been more interesting is, whether you did it in the editing process or anything else, is if you had maybe more colour in the sky as well. That might have been down to the settings you have on your camera or the editing process, or maybe if you just managed to catch it 10 minutes earlier, there might have been more light on the clouds. Certainly here, if I go to something like, let's take the curves, drag the curves down. As you see, as I can drag the curves down, it also brings more colour into the sky here. Now we've then lost some of the detail. Now if I take that down to sort of 40% or something like that, and then I'll just kind of bring some of that light back up into the mid-range here, because that cloud was a bit dull. Now something like that, we've now actually, it feels like we've got a bit more colour into the sky. And so the story, the narrative here is about the brightness of that the lighthouse against the rich colours of the setting sky. However, that wasn't. So let's go back here to this. Where are we? This point here. But it's not just about that. It's also about the caravan park. What we're doing is we're creating a place within it. And I quite like the fact that you've got this sort of yellow-orange bit going on here. And in fact, I feel that's quite a strong story. Now, again, because the sky itself isn't perhaps as rich in colour as it could be, maybe you don't need quite as much of it. If you sort of brought this down something like this, we're playing thirds, rule of thirds here as well. So this is sitting a third of the way in, 2/3 of this is the sky, 1/3 of this is the caravan park. But I think you could also kind of enrich it a little bit. So if I duplicate that layer, and I'll go to camera raw for do the quick edit. Now you can play. Contrast is just going to make everything too black and white. You could, again, if we go back to the curves, just drag that down a little bit or something like that. But or what we could maybe do is, just for the sake of it, I'm going to boost the vibrance, saturation a little bit, just bringing out a little bit more in the sky there. But then I'm going to take the clarity tool and drag that over. In fact, actually, maybe I've taken the saturation a bit too much there, so I'll just bring that down a little bit. But actually, I think this when we sort of take the clarity tool and we kind of drag that up, that brings, you can see, more detail out in the bottom here. And I quite like that. I think there's something quite nice about with this kind of orange glow, this sort of warm glow of the caravan park, and then contrasting against this large beacon of the lighthouse with the colour up against it, and then again trying to kind of create that sort of richer, more textured sense of the sky. So I think it's okay to have the three elements. Your eye automatically is going to be drawn to this sort of bright pink, because the pink being closest to the red, that's what's grabbing our attention first. Although we've got a yellow down here, which is quite strong, it's more of an orange, and it's not quite as strong as. So our eye comes here first, then our eye comes down to the caravan park. And the caravan park is part of the story of this, that there is a caravan park by the lighthouse, and you're getting it with then needing the texture in the clouds as well. So I hope that gives you a couple of thoughts there. Nadia, let me just cancel that. Hope that gives you a couple of ideas. Where are we? Robert says, I love the subject. April says, very pretty lighthouse, perhaps if you crop it. Meg says, really lovely photo, and I love the colours in the photo. Pat says, sky and lighthouse great. In my opinion, lose the caravans. Okay, so for Pat's taste, the caravans aren't adding anything to it. Karen says, love seeing the transformations. And April's enjoying that too. Okay, cool. So thank you for sending that one in, Nadia. Robert then. So now what we're talking is Robert has sent in. So I've been wanting to do something with one of these photos that I took in Paris last February. Anne and I were walking across a bridge when I noticed a photo shoot occurring. It looks like a fashion or magazine shoot. Unfortunately, the setting did not last long, and this was all I was able to take. I like the composition, but not sure about the colour grade. So Robert sent me a couple of different photos, but in the end, he'd chosen one, and then he'd done two different crops of it. So let me show you. So you can see here, down on the banks of the river, we've got somebody here is photographing somebody else. And presumably he's getting the bridge in the background. This was another crop of it, and so Robert's kind of struggling a bit with the crop, not sure about the colour lighting or the colour grading of it as well. But what Robert also did do was he sent me the original photo as well. So you can see actually it's not just do I go square crop or portrait crop. It's, you know, there's a kind of full-on thing here, which is it's cropped in massively. We've gone, so there's a lot of info. So really, to get the most out of that, you would have ideally had a zoom lens on and zoomed right in, so that you weren't losing as much information. So, you know, I mean, when we go to the full size one, this is 8,000 pixels, 8.5, yeah, no, just over 8,000 pixels wide. When we're looking at this one is only 2,500 pixels wide, and this one's only 1,800 pixels wide. So you can see that you've just not got the same amount of information to play with by cropping in that far. However, having said that, like I say, web size, you're never going to notice the difference. So when we look at this here, what we've got is obviously, yes, the key thing, the key part of the narrative here is the person taking the other photo. Now, obviously, the way that we're up on a bridge here, presumably this person's taking it. The lens we can see here is lower than this person's head, and he's got it tilted slightly upwards. So we can tell then that what he's trying to do is get the arch of the bridge into the shot as well. So that's kind of fun. There's a little bit of narrative going on here, but there's another bit of narrative that I quite like. No, yeah, we've got a couple of people walking past. They're not really adding to it. But what I do like is tucked over in the corner here, we've got a couple of people, and given the fact that there's the camera bag, these people are presumably part of the same shoot. He's looking very dapper in a trench coat there. So they could be friends, assistants, part of a magazine, if you say there's a shoot going on, and I really like them there. The tricky bit is that they are miles away from there. So if we try and get both of them in like that, what we end up with is this sort of massive empty space in between. So I have to say at this point, I'd be rather tempted to crop that in. So let's just say first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to just let's crop in a little bit. I want to have these people over on the right, and I want to have, so I'm going to do a first crop just to give me a sense of where we're at. So we've got this picture here. Maybe I just want to kind of, I quite like having the Port Royal up there, so Pont Royal, sorry, Royal Bridge. This is quite high. Maybe I'm trying to think how close can we come in. I like the shadows on the walls over here. I think these windows at the top are probably, would have been nice if they'd been lower in the picture, but I think we can probably lose them, and we can probably lose a bit more of the water. We know the water's there. We only need enough to be able to tell us it's there. But then what we really want to do is bring these people into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this up to the edge of the shadow of the tree, and I'm going to copy that and I'm going to paste it. And then that way we can move this over. Now, next thing I want to do is try and line it up, and I want to try and get these people closer in. So just so I can see, I'll just take the opacity down a bit so we can see that we can get these people closer. And then I need to line up the edge of the river here with the bank with the bank there, and we're probably looking at something, trying to get that water line right, something like about that, I think, give or take a bit. So take that back up to full. I can now bring the crop, take that crop tool there, bring that down to the top there, and bring this in from the side to there, and crop that, and then I can mask this, and then put that back on 100%, and essentially paint these guys back in. Take a little bit off the edge there, and just kind of allow that to kind of, a little bit of water to come in there. We've only got half of him, so we need to gently just kind of bring him back into shot, make sure we've got his shadow. Reverse that to just try and make sure that this shadow feels like it's not just disappearing, maybe just kind of bring that up. But you kind of play around with that a little bit more. And now what we have, I think, is a slightly more interesting. There's maybe a little bit too much over here on the left. Maybe I do have to bring it in a bit. It's a shame to miss but I suppose I could always cut that out and bring that one in as well. I won't just now, but it gives you that option. And then we can kind of recrop it in a little bit here as best we can, something like that. And I think now what we have is, I think we've got a slightly more interesting story. It's not just about this guy photographing this one. The onlookers here have also now become part of that narrative, and I think that becomes interesting. Now, if I select all of that, create a new layer, then at this point, it's a case of what we could do is play around, maybe give it a little bit of a vignette. So if I camera roll filter, optics, go to vignette, just bring that in a little touch, just to kind of taper down those corners so that our eye gets drawn into the middle. And then if you wanted, bring a little bit up out of the shadows, a little bit down on the highlights, play with the clarity a little bit, and it gives us a little bit more definition there. You can see we've gone from that to that, and that's kind of created a bit more definition. Now, the other bit that you were talking about, Robert, was the notion of the kind of the color grading. So everything has got this kind of beige look to it, apart from the red jumper. So I think now there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. If you've got Photoshop, there's an option here which says color lookup. And with color lookup, there's all sorts of things where you can click and it gives you a bunch of different presets. And sometimes you might find one of these which you quite like. Some of them are hideous depending on, and some of them work wonderfully. So you can play around with color presets. Likewise, actually, if you go to Camera Raw, again, there's an option over. Let's just pull this over so you're not looking behind my head. Over here, you've got this little color, this little double circle symbol here. There's a mass of there's adaptive sky where you can. Oh, that's just the sky part. Sorry. We've got portraits, sky, styles. So auto and retro. You can see that there's a whole bunch of different options you can go down there. There's cinematic ones. So there's a whole bunch of formed options for you. Another thing to do, though, I would say, is to look at the auto color and the auto tones. So if I go to auto tone, it's not really made much difference. Auto color. There. Now, what it's done is it's shifted, because everything's quite yellow, it's sort of auto, it's yellow shifted a bit. So having done auto color and then go back to auto tone, you can see we've gone from that to that. And that's got a slightly more realistic look to it. It's taken out some of and it allows for that sort of slightly cooler winter's day, which is reflected much more in the clothes these people are wearing and the fact that there's no shadows of leaves on the trees. So it does feel more like a winter's day because we've got the cooler bits in it, but it's not just being a blanket blue shift. So I often think if you go to image, auto color and auto tone, play around with those a little bit. Very often they can give you quite an interesting color grading too. But whether you go with those or you decide to take one of the kind of presets that come with either Camera Raw or Lightroom or just in your menu here options, I think it's always worth playing around with them. So I hope that gives you some ideas there, Robert. But thank you for sending that one in. That was a kind of fun photo to play with. Right, where are we? A couple more things here. VG says such clarity and the powerful shadows and clarity is good. Rosemary says the body posture of the woman in red tells a humorous story, and then there's Pat says, actually, Rosemary, I thought that was a chap. I thought it was a bloke as well. So what else have we got? Oh, Robert says that's an amazing edit. Oh, I'm pleased you found that useful then. Rosemary says clever solution to close the gap. It works really well. That could, and maybe the red shirted person is a fellow. Oops. April says great edit, not easy. And Robert says I will play around with the color settings. Never used them before. I like what you did. Okay, cool, excellent. Well, that pretty much then draws us to a close. Just a quick reminder that if you are finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them in some way, then buymeacoffee.com is certainly one of the ways you can do it. Right, like I say, now next week I'm going to continue with the slow fashion movement, because there was another style of shot that I did which was completely different. Knowing from the beginning that it was always going to be difficult trying to get some shots live on the runway as such, and that live on the runway, whilst I managed to get some shots which were used and were used in the magazine, aren't really my speciality. My speciality tends to be staged shoots. So I thought, is there a way of creating a staged shoot? Now, last year, when we shot at the Theatre Royal, I was able to hijack or rather take over a small dressing room that wasn't being used, and then with the help of a window dresser, we dressed the set, we put models in there, we created some interesting photos. And then the second shot we did was side of the stage. I did a setup actually literally on the side of the stage, and then during the interval and at the end of the show, when there weren't people in the audience, I was able to actually do some shots on the sort of side stage, backstage as well. Now, there wasn't going to be the option for either of those. There was no dressing room to go off and do separate shoots on that weren't being used. And also, you couldn't do anything to the side of the stage because it was in such a large hall that there wasn't, there was always people around. However, there was a VIP lounge. There was a little lounge off to one side, and there was this little alcove space. And it really was tiny. I mean, it was only probably about 5 foot wide and about 4 foot deep. But it had this lovely bit of red velvet backdrop and a little gold framed mirror. And I thought maybe we could do something in here, in the space. And so what I want to do is next week I'm going to show you those photos, and I'm going to talk you through how to make the most of taking photos of people in a really small space, in that trying to create something really interesting. So I ended up with several fun photos with that, and so I'll talk you through them and what I did. Also, of course, what we will be having is another critique section. So there's space there for me to do 3 or 4 critiques up to, if you want. So if you have an image and you would like some genuine feedback and some help moving forward, then send me your image. Also, questions. If you have questions, whatever's bothering you about photography, do let me know, and I will try and answer them in these podcasts. So I think that's pretty much us. So thank you ever so much to Nadia and to Robert for sending in the images. Thank you to all of you who've been chatting away, keeping the conversation going. It's all greatly appreciated, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.